She fell like a glitch in the stars. The orbital sensors caught her first, barely a blip, a flesh and bone heat signature spiraling through the atmosphere of Syraxis like debris tossed from a forgotten war. No ship, no thrusters, no escape pod, just a human girl wrapped in flickering flame, hurtling toward a dust-swept planet governed by the Galactic Empire's less than prestigious Sector 7A, mostly bureaucracy. Some mining. One regrettable zoo. To the Threxer who oversaw this domain, a species of tall, thick-chitin diplomats who moved like religious statues, the event was mildly inconvenient. Subcommander Varn clicked his mandibles as he watched the girl crash into Quadrant Dust Plane 43. Another Terran, he said with audible disgust. They fall like bad data. Lieutenant Grawl, a younger Threxer whose carapace was still matte with adolescence, tilted his head. Shall I retrieve the remains, Subcommander? Retrieve the incident, Varn corrected. If she's alive, question her. If not, recycle her. We don't negotiate with wildlife. The retrieval squad arrived within 20 standard minutes. What they found was not quite dead. She was breathing barely. Limbs askew, skin scorched, hair a tangled halo of carbon and static. And she was muttering, whispering really. Strange Terran phrases. Siri, cancel fall damage, she croaked. Ugh, 0 stars. Would not recommend. The Medrone word. No visible implants. No armor. Just basic human DNA and a questionable sense of humor. Back at Central Command, Varn loomed over her in the sterile interrogation chamber. The walls pulsed with quiet surveillance. She sat upright now in an ill-fitting thermal wrap, sipping what passed for tea on Syraxis. The Threxer didn't offer it. She made it appear. You fell from orbit, Varn said. She smiled weakly. Yeah, gravity's undefeated. You had no ship. I had bad timing. You should be dead. I'm working on it, she said brightly. Varn chittered with irritation. What were you doing above Syraxis? Sightseeing. Heard your dust planes were the Paris of the Outer Rim. You are human. She raised an eyebrow. Most days. You are unauthorized. This sector is off limits to Terran nationals. Cool, cool. So you're going to shoot me or find me? Grawl leaned in. Why are you here, Terran? She met his many eyes. I honestly don't know. I woke up, my ship was gone, and gravity did the rest. Trust me, if this was a plan, I'd be wearing pants. The room was silent. The Threxer stared at her, antennae twitching in disbelief. Your identity? Varn snapped. She tilted her head. You can call me Tuesday. Your real name. That is my real name. It was Monday, but I upgraded. Varn motioned to Grawl. Terminate her. She's of no use. Grawl's claw flexed toward his sidearm. The girl didn't flinch. She took another sip of tea. Then, just before the beam left the weapon, she whispered something. He taught me to bleed last. Grawl froze. The room changed. Varn's mandibles clicked once. Then again, slower. Repeat that. She smiled. Too late. Varn stepped back. You were trained. She didn't answer. Just looked past them, at a corner of a room where the wall panels curved ever so slightly inward. Funny place to put a camera. You're not broadcasting this, are you? Varn slammed his claw against the console. Who taught you? Silence. A red alert sounded 2 floors up. Security detail flooded the building. Protocols clicked into place like ancient gears grinding forward. The name had been said, not by her, but by the system that monitored her words, cross-referenced them with sealed archives, and sent an automatic warning to Empire intelligence. Baba Yaga detected. Grawl stumbled back from her like she was radioactive. His claws trembled. Impossible. He vanished. He's a myth. The girl stood. Her body shook, still healing from the fall, but her spine straightened like a soldier. She walked to the glass window, separating her from the terrified guards beyond, and breathed a puff of condensation onto it. Then she drew something in it with her finger. A chessboard. She turned. He's not gone. You just stopped looking. Panic spread faster than the bureaucracy could contain it. The alert jumped subspace relays, crossed command nexuses, and eventually hit the Galactic High Council like a detonation. Within hours, dozens of factions had eyes on the girl now locked in a cell on Syraxis. The Vurix counselor sent a drone to confirm. The Sarn collective voted to activate preemptive weapons. The archivist, Null, awakened from stasis and requested coffee. Meanwhile, on Syraxis, Tuesday sat quietly in her cell, humming what sounded like an old Earth folk song. The guards posted outside kept their distance. Some pretended she wasn't even there. Others watched her like she was an ancient bomb made of meat. One brave alien asked her again, "Who is Baba Yaga?" She looked up. "The reason I'm smiling." The request for planetary quarantine arrived 20 minutes too late. The next morning, the girl was gone. Not escaped, gone. Cell intact. Doors sealed. Sensors showed nothing. Only a small message left behind, carved into the alloy wall in scorched Terran script. You failed the test. 10 light-years away, on a station orbiting the red dwarf Praxum. For an emergency summit formed. Dozens of species. Thousands of delegates. Each with one question on their minds. How had humanity returned? No formal contact had occurred since the Treaty of Emberfall, signed reluctantly after the humans accidentally redirected a comet to decimate the Thrall fleet. That incident alone had left 8 systems in ruin and taught the galaxy 2 things. Never challenge Earth directly, and never let them smile while they plan. But now a girl had fallen, claimed tutelage under the myth, survived planetary re-entry, vanished from a locked cell. All without visible technology. Theories exploded across data streams. She's genetically altered. She's a clone. She's a bait mechanism. But no one asked the real question. Why now? Except one. In a forgotten corner of the summit, a Celtari ambassador, 4'2", feathered, smelled of ink, leaned toward her aide. It's not about her, she murmured. It's about the reaction. We're not watching a rescue. Her aide blinked. Then what? We're watching a mirror. Back on Syraxis, the girl's image was scrubbed from the system. The Threxer labeled the incident containment failure. Subcommander Varn was placed on administrative leave, which for his species meant a mandatory century of silence meditation. Grawl requested reassignment to a lava mining facility and swore off speaking altogether. The planet fell back into dust-choked routine. But it was a performance now forced, stiff, uncertain. Because even the bureaucrats had learned something. Humanity had rules. Politeness was camouflage. Questions were weapons. And silence? Silence was a warning. Aboard a rusted freighter drifting near the Helix Nebula, the girl reclined on a cot with one leg draped over the side and a dented flask in her hand. Phase 1 complete, she said. A small hologram of a grinning child with silver eyes flickered to life beside her. Nice theatrics, the child said. They bought it. Of course they did. I flopped harder than an old Earth politician. He giggled. And the Baba Yaga line? She tapped her head. You said make it theatrical. I went full myth. The boy tilted his head. You sure they didn't trace the extraction? They were too busy wetting themselves. He nodded approvingly. So what's next Tuesday? She stood and stretched, bones popping. Now, she said grinning. Now, we let them panic. Let every species with a conscience start second-guessing every friendly human they've ever met. She turned toward the viewport. And then we let the real ones show up. A pause. Stage 2. She smiled. Let's play chess. It began with a tremor in the networks. Not a quake or explosion, but a ripple in protocols long believed defunct. On the edge of a dying galaxy, in an archive sealed since the Emberfall Accords, a signal blinked red for the first time in a century. It had only one directive: initiate Baba Yaga protocol. Archivist Null stirred from digital dormancy with a sigh that echoed through 16 quantum processors. It blinked open artificial eyes no one had seen since it refused the title of Galactic Historian because it hated biographies. The message was short. 5 words. She was a student. Confirm. Null scanned recent transmissions. Syraxis. Human girl. Crashed, survived. Claimed to be trained. Vanished. It accessed the older records, the forbidden ones, locked behind myth and classified by 32 species under joint fear. It confirmed the phrase was accurate. Taught by Baba Yaga. The expression had no literal Terran translation, but across the galactic diplomatic strata, it meant only one thing: a walking, talking prelude to disaster. Null opened a private channel to the Galactic Council. It used a tone file called Urgency Level 7 Existential, requesting emergency quorum. Human threat potential has exceeded predictive containment. On the high orbit of Harkonnen Spire, where the Council resided in a golden ring of artificial gravity and excessive furniture, the alert was met with confusion, then hushed panic. Delegates of over 200 species assembled within hours. No refreshments were served. Vurix, Threxer, Solari, Uni. Their diplomats blinked and buzzed and shuddered as the phrase repeated across translated comms. Student of Baba Yaga. Someone whispered, "Is that a code for a weapon?" Another replied, "It is the weapon." Sarn Counselor Velix clicked his teeth, his throat sac vibrating. "I was there at the Emberfall arbitration. I saw what he did. You said it was strategy. It was genocide. But polite. Explain." Velix leaned forward. He orchestrated the collapse of an entire fleet without firing a single shot. He sent one man into negotiations, smiled, offered gifts. Then 3 weeks later, the fleet turned on itself, citing moral disagreements. No outside interference, just influence. He used diplomacy? No. He used humanity. A murmur of disgust spread. For many species, the humans were a paradox, loud but secretive, adaptable but erratic, and worst of all, funny. Funny in a way that made it hard to detect when they were being sincere or setting a trap. The current theory was that the girl on Syraxis was either a clone, a message, or a curse. No one agreed which was worse. Uni Ambassador Zarek, shaped like a floating jellyfish in ceremonial obsidian silk, offered the room a tremulous translation of a Terran text. In one of their ancient fables, it said, Baba Yaga was a forest crone with iron teeth who ate travelers and gave strange wisdom. The human military has adapted the term. Baba Yaga now signifies a person of inexplicable cunning, likely to cause disproportionate destruction with minimum resources. Sounds like an old strategist, someone muttered. Or a death cult. Vurix Delegatolo, feathers trembling, raised a hand. We need confirmation. Is the original Baba Yaga still alive? Null's voice sliced across the room. Possibly. I have located an anomaly consistent with his last known signature. A visual emerged, a lush, green moon orbiting a minor star, barely charted, dismissed as an agricultural reserve. It showed one structure, a cabin of Terran design, surrounded by rows of tomatoes and sunflowers. That's not a fortress, Velix said. That's worse, Null replied. That's peace. Humans only garden when they're done burning things. The council voted. A delegation would go. Not a war fleet, yet, but an elite diplomatic envoy equipped with surveillance, assassins, and 3 polite interpreters. The ship, Concordia's Whisper, launched by dusk. 12 hours later, it reached the moon. The landing was quiet. No defenses fired. No automated warnings. The air smelled of cinnamon and iron. A group of delegates approached the cabin on foot. The Threxer ambassador wore ceremonial blade arms. The Solari brought anti-psionic wards. The Vurix arrived carrying a panic feather. The man sat on a wooden stool, pruning a tomato plant with ridiculous care. His hair was silver but thick. He wore denim pants and a faded shirt with the words NASA, still better than you. He didn't look up, just spoke softly. You shot her. The group froze. No one had announced themselves. You shot my student, he said again. Threxer diplomat Zune clicked his claws. You are the one called Baba Yaga? The man wiped dirt from his hands onto a cloth. That's what you call me. I prefer Doug. You trained the girl? I watered her. Let her grow. Same as this garden. She crashed onto a restricted planet. I know. She survived atmospheric re-entry. I know. She bled black. That wasn't blood. It was a reminder. A reminder of what? He looked up. That we're not gone. The air changed. Silence, but not stillness. A pulse of recognition, as if the planet itself leaned closer. Vurik's delegate, Tolo, trembled. What is she? She's new. You only understand the old us. Soldiers. Colonizers. Shouting into the void. And now, he smiled. It wasn't cruel. Just measured. Now we whisper. And the void listens. Zune stepped forward, claws gleaming. You're threatening the Galactic Accord. No. I'm acknowledging its expiration. You've declared war. Have I? I thought I was gardening. You sent that girl as a weapon. No, Doug said, standing slowly. I sent her as a question. You answered poorly. The Sarn representative stepped back. You're playing games with interstellar stability. Doug walked past them, slowly, like a teacher inspecting unruly students. You think humans want war. That's your first mistake. We want peace. But we will redefine it if needed. And what definition do you propose? Peace is when no one wants to test us again. The diplomats flinched. Earth signed the accords in good faith, Doug continued. We offer trade, culture, humor. You took our memes and ignored our warnings. You violated the containment protocols. You shot a girl with no weapons and asked why she smiled. You've forgotten who we are. He reached a small fountain, drew water into a can, and began to pour it over the roots of a lemon tree. Do you know what humans do better than anyone else? He asked. No one answered. We survive. And we remember. He turned. Tell your council this. She's not the only student. And some of us never stop teaching. The delegation left in silence. No one spoke on the ship. The Concordia's whisper felt colder on the return flight. By the time they arrived back at Council orbit, the message had already gone viral. Not across public networks. Those had been jammed by human subroutines weeks ago, but in private channels whispered between admirals and spy masters. Doug was real. Baba Yaga had spoken. And worse, he had smiled. Meetings dissolved into emergency sessions. Defensive grids activated. Treaties were reread and reinterpreted. Half the galactic powers began quietly drawing battle lines. The other half began drafting apology letters they would never send. Some suggested striking first. Others advised diplomacy. One Solari proposed sacrificing the entire Syraxis sector as tribute. Meanwhile, on Earth, nothing was said. No messages broadcast. No warnings given. Just the soft, unbroken silence of a world watching through a two-way mirror. The girl's disappearance was still unsolved. But that, too, had become a lesson. Because the real fear wasn't where she'd gone. It was who else might follow her. One of the youngest aides in the council, a new hire, barely fluent in 4 trade languages, whispered the question everyone else avoided. If she was just a student, how many teachers are there? Archivist Null answered softly. We don't know. But the last time they taught something, it changed the galaxy. Aboard his moon, Doug sat by a fire pit, roasting something over a flickering flame. A radio beside him played a slow blues tune. In the sky above, a constellation shaped like an open hand sparkled faintly. He looked up at the stars, sighed once, and said, Your turn, Tuesday. And somewhere, unseen, unheard, the stars shifted. The diplomat's hand hovered over the armrest, fingers twitching in coded muscle language meant for concealed transmitters. The other delegates had remained aboard the shuttle, feigning an excuse of atmospheric sensitivity. Cowards, all of them. But he had come down. Because someone had to. The air on the moon was unreasonably crisp. Artificially managed, he suspected. Not a single contaminant. It smelled like pine, old paper, and something else. Cinnamon, maybe. The man was already waiting, kneeling beside a cabbage patch, elbows dirty, humming something old and slow earth music, though the melody had an edge to it, like the soundtrack to a funeral where no one cries. The diplomat approached with caution. He'd been briefed, yes. Warned, lectured, even prayed over. But no file could fully translate this moment. Nothing could prepare you for meeting a man who had made entire fleets paranoid enough to self-destruct. The legends were conflicting. He had no real name, only titles. Baba Yaga was the most common. "Excuse me," the diplomat said. He cleared his throat. "Doug, is it?" The man looked up. His face was calm, weathered like riverstone. "If you like. Depends what game we're playing. I'm here as a representative of the United Galactic Accord. We are." "You're afraid." The diplomat stiffened. "We are concerned." Doug sat back on his heels. "That's what people say before they start lying." The diplomat chose not to respond to that. He pulled a small recording disc from his coat and held it up. "With your permission, I'd like to record this conversation for translation. You can record it for your nightmares if you want. Won't change a thing." The disc chirped as it activated. The diplomat's voice dropped half a tone. He used his official register, which had been engineered to sound soothing, rational, non-threatening. "Sir, the Council would like to clarify your relationship to the individual known as Tuesday, also referred to as the human female who crash-landed on Syraxis and subsequently disappeared." Doug blinked. "That's a lot of titles for a girl who didn't fight back. She survived impact, escaped containment, and referenced you in a way that triggered multiple high-level panic failsafes. Sounds like your failsafes are doing more harm than she ever did." The diplomat frowned. "What exactly did you teach her?" Doug stood slowly. He walked to the porch and wiped his hands on a stained cloth that had once been white. "I taught her patience," he said at last. "And silence. And how to mean something when you speak. That's not warfare." "No," Doug said, glancing over his shoulder. "That's worse. That's knowing when war is already lost, and how to end it without lifting a weapon." The diplomat took a cautious step closer. "She told us she was your student, that you trained her. Why now? Why send her?" "I didn't send her. I graduated her." "You're saying she acted on her own?" "I'm saying she didn't need orders. Just clarity." The wind shifted, brushing across the field of herbs behind the cabin. Somewhere, a wind chime clinked in a pattern that sounded suspiciously like Morse code. Doug picked up a mug and poured himself something from a ceramic kettle. "Want tea?" The diplomat hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise." Doug smiled thinly. "Smart answer." He sipped and leaned against the railing, studying the stars. "You know, I've watched your empire for a long time. Always expanding, always analyzing, always thinking you're ahead of the curve. But you never looked inward. We have internal audits." "No. I mean soul-searching. Understanding that just because you can subjugate doesn't mean you should. You call it order. We call it denial." The diplomat adjusted his collar. "And humans are somehow morally superior." "No," Doug said. "We're just honest about being monsters. You pretend otherwise." The diplomat paused his recorder. "Let me speak plainly. Your name incites fear. The girl's emergence has destabilized 6 systems. If you do not provide clear intentions, the Council may resort to action." Doug's eyes twinkled, but it wasn't friendly. "Action? You mean retaliation? We would prefer deterrence. You don't deter humans. You educate them. But you waited too long for that." The diplomat exhaled. "Doug, Baba Yaga, whatever you are, this can't be a threat." Doug set his cup down. "No, it's a fact. We don't threaten. We train." The wind died. The diplomat blinked. "Train whom?" Doug walked down the steps, his boots making no sound. "Everyone." He passed the diplomat, motioning for him to follow. They walked through a quiet garden path, winding past apple trees and mint patches. Doug pointed. "Over there, Victor. Used to be a janitor on a mining barge. Now, he teaches negotiation strategies using household metaphors. Turned 2 warlords into pen pals." Another patch. "Lonnie, deaf girl. Took out a hacker ring using only facial expressions and a well-placed virus disguised as a dog meme." The diplomat slowed. "Are you saying you've seeded agents across the galaxy?" "No," Doug said. "I didn't send anyone. I just offered a place to remember what being human meant. The rest was their choice." "And the girl?" Doug stopped beside a small gravestone, simple and unadorned. He placed a fresh flower on it. She was our first final. The diplomat stared. Final what? Test. She wasn't meant to survive. She was meant to reveal. Reveal what? Doug turned. That you're still afraid of the thing you pretend doesn't exist. And what is that? Us. Smiling. Watching. Teaching each other how not to be broken. And succeeding. The diplomat's hand twitched again. A signal, subtle, buried beneath his gestures. Doug saw it, of course. He'd been watching. She's not alone anymore, Doug said, voice soft. What does that mean? It means you're already too late to stop it. Behind them, in the distance, came a hum. A child walked into view from the orchard. Thin, small, maybe 10 standard years old, wearing overalls and holding a data slate. He was whistling something upbeat. Hey Baba, the child said. Finish the scans. 5 new satellites, 2 cloak ships, and a bug in the radishes. Doug nodded. They're getting better. The diplomat stepped back. You're using children? Doug narrowed his eyes. We're using minds. You're the one calling them children. You're creating a cult. No, a curriculum. He knelt beside the boy and ruffled his hair. Back inside Milo. Okay. Want me to jam the eavesdroppers? Not yet. Let them hear what they're afraid of. The boy ran off. The diplomat stared. What are you planning? Doug looked up at the sky. We're not. You are. That's not an answer. Doug smiled. Isn't it? The diplomat fumed. I should remind you that the council is prepared to escalate. You are harboring fugitives and orchestrating a network designed to undermine galactic sovereignty. Doug picked up his cup again. Big words. You rehearsed that. It's a warning. Then you still don't get it. He stepped forward, close enough that the diplomat could see his pupils narrow like a predator's. We don't do warnings. We do outcomes. The diplomat's throat tightened. Doug's tone softened. And you're not the audience. That night, the diplomat transmitted his full report. The council read it in silence. There were no objections, no votes. Just a stillness that hadn't existed in decades. Then the discussion turned to probabilities, fleet movements, containment strategies, and doctrine alignment. But in every mind there remained the same image. A man in a garden, smiling politely as the world remembered what it had forgotten. Back on the moon, Doug sat by the fire again. The logs crackled. The wind spoke in branches. Tuesday's voice came from the communicator. Status. Doug answered he bought it. Panic level, 5 out of 10. Will increase once they realize you left the knife in the wall. I smiled too. I know. You always do. She paused. Any regrets? Doug looked at the stars. Only that it took this long for them to remember who we are. The fire snapped, and somewhere in the dark, a dozen students listened. The Grand Assembly Chamber had never been this silent. Not after the fall of Bastarian. Not during the Emberfall Tribunal. Not even when the skies cracked above the silver expanse, and entire moons vanished into antimatter haze. This silence was different. It was waiting, watching itself. In the center of the chamber, a flickering hollow projection looped grainy footage. A young human girl, arms loose at her sides, drifting unaided through hard vacuum. No ship, no tether, no suit, just skin, breath, and a smile that made half the council fidget. She moved across space as if gravity hadn't noticed her yet. That had been 2 hours ago. Syraxis's defenses had locked, charged, and fired. She had absorbed the energy, not deflected it, not shielded against it. Absorbed it, her body momentarily glowing like a lantern against the void before dimming back into her regular self. Then she'd spoken, across every frequency, every language. We were never invading. We were watching, waiting, testing your kindness. Your fear was the answer. Now she stood at the center of Syrax's capital courtyard. Alone. No weapons. No backup. Just her boots scraping against polished alien stone and the sound of alarms dying out embarrassed. Above her, orbiting warships trained their guns downward. Not a single human vessel was in sight. Sub-Commander Varn had returned to command, stripped of rank, but reinstated under Emergency Directive 14. He watched her from a fortress balcony, mandibles grinding. "She wants a confrontation," he hissed. Lieutenant Grawl, now jittery and frayed, shook his head. "No, Sub-Commander. She wants an audience." "Then let her speak. But record every syllable. And ready the failsafe." In the courtyard, she turned her head slowly toward a surveillance unit and waved. "Hi, friends. Miss me?" She paused. No response came. "I figured," she continued. "See, you never asked why I smiled when you shot me. That's the real question, isn't it? You didn't wonder how I survived. You wondered why I seemed so pleased about it." The surveillance unit zoomed slightly. "It's because I wasn't the one you should have been aiming at." 100 light-years away, across the most secure Council installation in galactic space, alarms ignited in Archive Sector Epsilon. Archivist Null's core processed 1 trillion calculations in half a second and locked down 5 planetary systems. Not enough. Someone had piggybacked on the Syraxis security stream. Someone else was already in the network. Not inside it. Behind it. Null activated every firewall protocol, launched emergency cleanses, purged all feeds, and issued a universal warning. Then a second voice, young male, sweet as spilled honey, echoed across the Galactic Council feed. "Hi there. I'm Milo. I helped her build the Smile." The Council erupted. Fleet leaders barked orders, demanding immediate tracebacks. Spy masters initiated purge sequences. Civil leaders screamed into dead comms. And then the stars themselves seemed to shift. From dozens of systems unrelated and previously unremarkable, vessels of Terran design lit up. Civilian transports, deep space research craft, even museum pieces from the human colonial age. Each one powered on, their drives humming with soft menace. None of them moved. None fired. They just turned, silently, as if listening for a beat only humans could hear. On Syraxis, Tuesday sat cross-legged on a stone. Calm. Loose. "This isn't a war," she said. "It's an intervention." Sub-Commander Varn snarled. What in the void does she mean? The girl looked up at the sky, blinking once. "You've mistaken quiet for weakness. That's not your fault. Most apex predators are loud. Teeth. Roars. Blood. But humans? We evolved around fire. Around stories. Around waiting for the right moment. A pause. That moment's here. On the moon where Doug tended his tomatoes, the sky flared. A ripple shimmered over the horizon, revealing cloaked Terran ships, silent, massive, dormant. They did not advance. They existed. That was enough. Doug set down his watering can. Milo appeared beside him, data slate in hand. They saw it. Doug nodded. "And they think we're bluffing." Doug smiled faintly. "We always are. Until we're not." On the council floor, Ambassador Velix of the Sarn stood trembling. She's not declaring war. She's triggering a reaction. She's placed herself as a mirror. "She's a terrorist," barked the Threxer envoy. "No," said the Verg's delegate, voice low. "She's a litmus test." Across the galaxy, human sympathizers, embedded, forgotten, underestimated, received activation codes buried in jokes, poems, lullabies. The bartender who never missed a face. The cargo inspector with a perfect memory. The janitor with 1,000 access codes. None of them picked up weapons. They just began telling stories about what it meant to be human, about what the galaxy had once learned and now ignored. The trap wasn't violence. The trap was belief. Doug sat by the fire, the stars shifting like notes in a melody he'd memorized. Milo watched him carefully. "Are we doing the right thing?" the boy asked. Doug didn't answer right away. He reached into the flames and pulled out a metal disc, perfectly unburned. "We're reminding them," he said finally, "that we're not here to conquer. We're here to teach. But they only learn when they're afraid." Milo's face was young, but his eyes were ancient. "And if they don't learn?" Doug looked at the sky. "Then they'll burn, and we'll rebuild the lesson for the next ones." On Syraxis, Tuesday stood again. No military force dared approach. Drones hovered nervously. She reached into her coat and pulled out a stone. Just a simple, rough earthstone. She placed it on the ground and stepped back. Then she spoke a final line. This is the weight of what comes next. The stone shimmered and projected a map, not of space, but of time. The galaxy's conflicts. Every war, every betrayal, every time Earth extended a hand and was met with a weapon. And how each moment had been recorded, filed, archived. Forgiven, but never forgotten. She looked into the nearest camera. We let you shoot us, because it's the only language you believe. Now you've seen ours. She vanished. Not blinked. Not phased. Just gone. Panic erupted. But it was too late. Across the quadrant, human ships didn't fire. They simply broadcast. One word. Enough. It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. Systems locked. Fleets jammed. AI cores went still. Not disabled, just overwritten. No viruses. No damage. Just code that whispered, sit down, breathe, think. In the silence, one by one, the galaxy began to understand. Not what humanity had done, but what they had refrained from doing. On the council floor, the delegates stared as their feeds flickered. Doug's face appeared, calm, worn kind. You asked what she was trained for. Now you know. She was never meant to fight you. She was meant to stop you, without needing a bullet. Someone whispered, this is domination. No, Doug said gently. This is restraint. He leaned forward. But don't confuse that with mercy. The feed ended. Every species had a decision to make. Not about retaliation, but about whether they could look in the mirror again and not flinch. On a quiet moon, the fire crackled low. Doug rose and walked into the trees. Milo watched him go, then turned to the stars. They would sleep for now. But the lesson had landed. Humanity hadn't returned to conquer. They'd come to grade the test. And the galaxy had failed.